Welcome to Russian History Retold, Episode 327, Soviet Scientists. Last time, we covered 13 Russian scientists who had significant impact and influence. Today, we will cover those Soviet scientists who did the same. And to repeat myself from an earlier episode, I will not be including Trofim Lysenko, whom AI included when I asked who were the great Soviet scientists of the 20th centuries. I think artificial intelligence needs to be taught a little bit of a lesson in this instance. Our first Soviet scientist was one I could have listed with the other Russians in the last episode, but I decided to place him here instead. And his name is Vladimir Obruchev, and he was born in 1863. His most important contributions were in the field of geology, especially gold mining. He came up with a theory of why Siberia was rich in gold deposits and helped with the construction of the Central Asian and Trans-Siberia Railroad. Obruchev published most of his books while under Soviet rule. It was said about his authorship, quote, over 1,000 scientific works, among which are a most extensive geological study of Siberia and a 5-volume history of the geological exploration of Siberia, which have been awarded the Lenin Prize, as well as the prizes and medals of several scientific societies. Obruchev was the director of the Geological Institute between 1930 and 1933 and the Permafrost Institute between 1939 and 1956 of the Academy of Sciences of the Soviet Union. An interesting side note, Obruchev was also one of the first Russian science fiction writers. Obruchev's most famous works in sci-fi were Plutonia and Sannikov Land, both of which were focused on the Jurassic period dinosaurs. He passed away in 1956 at the age of 92. Lena Solomovna Stern is the first female on our list of important Russian Soviet scientists, and one who went through an awful lot of stress in life to achieve what she did, mainly because she was Jewish. Denied entry into Russian universities because of her religion by the Tsarist government, she was caused to study abroad, gaining a medical degree in 1903. Stern had little to no prospects there, so she returned to Latvia, then part of the Russian Empire. She passed her exam to become a doctor in Russia, but found no openings for her degree. Stern received an offer to do research in Geneva, where she and her co-researchers, Frederick Batelli and Torsten Thunberg, would produce 54 papers on the subject of cellular metabolism between 1904 and 1922. One of her most significant contributions to the world of medicine was when, quote, Stern introduced the term blood-brain barrier at the Medical Society of Geneva. This would occur in 1921. From here, Stern was invited to become the chair of physiology at the Second Moscow State University, which she accepted in 1924. In 1939, she became the first female full member of the Academy of Sciences of the Soviet Union. She then won the coveted Stalin Prize in 1943. Things would go south for Stern starting in 1948 because of her involvement in the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, or JAC. She would be arrested in 1949 and put on trial with 14 others in 1952. Stern would be the only person to survive this event, known as the Night of the Murdered Poets. Her sentence was reduced to 5 years in exile by Joseph Stalin himself. After Stalin died in 1953, she would be returned to Moscow and finally exonerated by the Presidium in 1958. Stern would lead the Department of Physiology at the Biophysics Institute between 1954 and her death in 1968. Our next scientist, someone that we all know, Nikolai Vavilov, whom I did the whole episode on. He had an absolutely remarkable career as a Russian and Soviet agronomist, botanist, and geneticist who identified the centers of origin of cultivated plants. His battle with the pseudoscientist Trofim Lysenko would eventually cost him his life. Born in 1887, he was the brother of Sergei Ivanovich Vavilov, a renowned Soviet physicist. Vavilov's interest in agronomy was in part due to the frequent crop failures in Russia and the food rationing and famines his family had to deal with while living in poverty. He made it his life's work to end the recurring food shortages that plagued the entire world at the time. Sadly, a man whose motivation to become a scientist was to end famines would starve to death in a Soviet prison in 1943 at the age of 55. And Vavilov's legacy far outshines his nemesis. Now, Nikolai Semyonov, born in 1896, was the first and only Soviet citizen to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry. In 1956, he and Sir Cyril N. Hinshelwood were awarded the prize for, quote, their researches into the mechanism of chemical reactions. Semyonov spent most of his career focusing on and developing the field of chemical chain reactions. While Semyonov fought for Alexander Kolchak's White Army during the Russian Civil War, he would become a staunch advocate for the communist rule of the Soviet Union, known as the most famous signatory to a 1971 public letter from Soviet scientists to United States President Richard Nixon regarding the murder trial of Angela Davis. Born in 1903, Igor Kurchatov is known as, quote, the father of the Russian atomic bomb. I found it rather interesting that Igor was a self-taught nuclear physicist, as his education was in naval architecture as well as some basic physics. From my research into Soviet scientists, this was not uncommon. Much of what they did in creating the first nuclear weapons was stolen from the United States and Great Britain under Lavrenti Beria's NKVD. Kurchatov had been compared to the head of the U.S. Manhattan Project, Robert Oppenheimer. Igor would lead the Russian equivalent, although he wasn't the first choice, as Abraham Ioffe was. In a letter to Beria concerning the information his spies had obtained from the Americans, quote, I've examined the attached list of American projects on uranium. Almost every one of them is of great interest to us. These materials are of enormous interest and great value. The receipt of further information of this type is extremely desirable. It is very obvious that Soviet nuclear weapons development was seriously behind that of the Americans and British. Kurchatov would meet his fate in 1949 due to a serious radiation accident at Chelyabinsk 40. It has been estimated that it is possible that even more people died at that event than at Chernobyl. His health would begin to deteriorate, causing him to die 8 years later at the age of 57. Our next Soviet scientist is Pavel Cherenkov, who was born in 1904. His accomplishments in physics won him a share of the 1958 Nobel Prize in Physics with Ilya Frank and Igor Tamm, quote, for the discovery and interpretation of the Cherenkov effect. The Cherenkov effect is a highly technical event that can be best described as the characteristic blue glow of an underwater nuclear reactor. Its cause is similar to the cause of a sonic boom, the explosive sound heard when faster-than-sound movement occurs. He began his work in 1934 under Sergei Vavilov, Nikolai's brother. Pavel's observation of the emission of blue light from a bottle of water subjected to radioactive bombardment would have major implications in the study of nuclear physics and cosmic rays. During his long career, he would win 2 Stalin Awards, as well as numerous others. As an aside, the novel Ghost Fleet, which discusses how the next world war will be fought, claims that many believe that the Star Trek character Pavel Chekhov is named after Pavel Chernikov. Also, in the movie Starship Troopers, spaceships travel faster than the speed of light via the Cherenkov effect. Our seventh famous Soviet scientist is George Gamow. Some of you might be saying to yourselves, whoa, wait a minute, he was an American. Well, this became true in his lifetime. He was born in Odessa and graduated from the Institute of Physics and Mathematics in Odessa and the University of Leningrad between 1923 and 1929. From here, Gamow began his work on quantum theory at the University of Göttingen and then moved on to the University of Copenhagen to study theoretical physics. In 1931, Gamow was elected a corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR at the age of 28, being one of the youngest in the institution's history. He would then solve the theory of the alpha decay of a nucleus through something known as tunneling. Now, honestly, most of this is way above my head, but it was a major breakthrough in quantum mechanics. In 1931, it was to become an important year in Gamow's life. He would marry Lyubov Vokmintseva and would make the decision to leave the Soviet Union due to the increasing pressures of oppression of his colleagues. Gamow was denied the ability to attend a conference in Italy, so he began to make plans to leave the country in different, more daring, and dangerous ways using a kayak. In 1932, he and his wife first planned to paddle, get this, 250 kilometers over the Black Sea to Turkey. The other was an attempt to paddle from Murmansk to Norway. Poor weather halted both tries, but luckily for Gamow, they were never found out about his attempts. In 1933, Gamow was stunned that he would be allowed to attend the 7th Solvay Conference on Physics in Brussels. He insisted that he be allowed to bring his wife with him. Despite early denial of the request, it was eventually rescinded and the pair made their way to Brussels. From there, the two extended their stay. They made their way first to the Curie Institute, the University of London, and finally to the University of Michigan in 1934. Gamow became a professor at George Washington University in 1934 and then recruited physicist Edward Teller from London to join him. The two published numerous papers together, as he did with others, and George Gamow became a naturalized American in 1940. From there, he became increasingly interested in cosmology, leading to the development of the Big Bang Theory. Gamow would write numerous books on various scientific ideas. He was a proponent of using atomic energy to power rockets to the moon and beyond. Gamow passed away in 1968 at the age of 64 in Boulder, Colorado. The next great Soviet scientist we will talk about is Sergei Korolev, the lead Soviet rocket engineer and spacecraft designer during the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s. Born in 1907, Sergei would be caught up in the Great Terror when, in 1938, he was arrested as, quote, member of an anti-Soviet counter-revolutionary organization. While this original charge could have cost him his life, it was reduced to, quote, the saboteur of military technology. Now, Korolev would serve 6 years in prison, including time in the Kolyma labor camp. Upon his release, Korolev would become one of the most important rocket designers in the world. He was so good at it that the Soviet government hid his name from even those working for him due to their fear that the Americans would assassinate Korolev. He was only known as chief designer. Many of the cosmonauts who worked closely with him were unaware of his last name. Korolev was very involved in the design and execution of various firsts in the Soviet space program, including the launching of Laika, the space dog, Sputnik 3, the first person Yuri Gagarin to go into space, Voskhod 1, and the first person Alexei Leonov to conduct a spacewalk. What is truly sad about the life of Sergei Korolev was the damage done to him during his years in the Gulag system. He apparently suffered a heart attack while incarcerated, as well as losing all his teeth due to scurvy. In 1960, he suffered another heart attack and learned that he had kidney disease. By 1966, his health was failing, and he passed away under mysterious circumstances while undergoing an operation to supposedly remove a cancerous tumor. Soviet émigré Leonid Vladimirov described Korolev as, quote, short of stature, heavily built, with head sitting awkwardly on his body. With brown eyes glistening with intelligence, he was a skeptic, a cynic, and a pessimist who took the gloomiest view of the future. We are all going to be shot and there will be no obituary. We will all vanish without a trace, was his favorite expression. Lev Landau, born in 1908, was an important theoretical physicist who was thought to be the last of his kind to understand all the branches of physics. Like Korolev, Landau was caught up in Stalin's Great Purge, but he only remained in custody for a couple of years as Pyotr Kapitsa and Niels Bohr appealed to Stalin for his release. Landau's contribution to various fields of physics led him to win the 1962 Nobel Prize, particularly for developing a mathematical theory of superfluidity that accounts for the properties of liquid helium-2 at a temperature below 2.17 Kelvin. A devout communist and socialist during his lifetime, despite his arrest in 1937, Landau believed in free love despite being married to Cora Gorbanzeva. Their son, Igor, would also go on to be a theoretical physicist. In 1962, Landau got into a serious car accident, which affected his ability to concentrate, pretty much ending his career. He would die from complications of the accident 6 years later, in 1968. Next up is Mikhail Chumakov, born in 1909. And he was a world-renowned microbiologist who helped develop the polio vaccine alongside Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin. Chumakov's work convinced Soviet officials in 1960 to allow for the production and testing of the oral poliovirus vaccine, which at the time was made from live attenuated poliovirus. This would lead to stopping breakouts of polio throughout Eastern Europe and Japan. It would also spur the United States to join in the use of the vaccine beginning in 1962, when I would get my first polio vaccine. Chumakov would go on to produce over 900 scholarly papers on various subjects. He also created a number of other human and veterinarian vaccines, including an inactivated vaccine against tick-borne encephalitis, measles, influenza, and canine distemper. In his personal life, he would be caught up in the Stalin-concocted doctor's plot in 1952 because he refused to fire the Jewish members of his team. With Stalin's death the following year, and we've seen this too often, Stalin's death really did a lot for science, I have to admit. Just going a little off script here, but it is true. Chumakov's life would be spared because of his death, and he was restored to his position as the director of the Ivanovsky Institute of Virology in Moscow. Today, that very institute he began is known as the M.P. Chumakov Center for Research and Development of Biological Products of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Chumakov passed away in 1993 at the age of 83. Our next scientist of note was Oleg Gazenko, the firstborn under the Bolshevik flag. Born in 1918, He would lead the Institute of Biomedical Problems in Moscow and the Soviet program to train animals in space. Gouzenko selected and trained Laika, the dog we mentioned earlier, who flew on the 1957 Sputnik 2 mission. His involvement in the Soviet space program mainly focused on using animals before sending humans up. Gouzenko would express regret about the death of Laika, saying this, quote, "Work with animals is a source of suffering to all of us. We treat them like babies who cannot speak. The more time passes, the more I'm sorry about it. We shouldn't have done it. We did not learn enough from the mission to justify the death of the dog." Gouzenko passed away in 2007 at the age of 88, still working as an academician at the Russian Academy of Science. Next, we have Andrei Sakharov, born in 1921, was not only known as a brilliant Soviet physicist, but also was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, being given the award in 1975. His vocal opposition to the Soviet system that denied basic human rights, individual freedom, and civil liberties would lead his being deemed a dissident. The attacks from the Soviet government and many of his scientific colleagues would begin in 1972. That was the same year that he would marry fellow human rights activist Yelena Bonner. Sakharov's family was highly educated, as he was to be also, of course. His interest in physics was likely due to his father being a teacher of the subject. Initially studying physics at the University of Moscow beginning in 1938, due to the war, he was moved to Ashgabat in Turkmenistan to complete his undergraduate degree. From there, Sakharov would complete his doctorate at the Theoretical Department of Physical Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences under future Nobel Prize winner in physics Igor Tamm. Sakharov would also be mentored by one of our previously talked about scientists, Igor Kurchatov. This would come up when the Soviet atomic bomb project was in full force. His development of nuclear weapons for the Soviet Union was initially viewed as being positive in his eyes. He would be quoted as saying, quote, "After more than 40 years, we've had no Third World War, and the balance of nuclear terror may have helped to prevent one. But I am not at all sure of this. Back then, in those long-gone years, the question didn't even arise. What most troubles me now is the instability of the balance, the extreme peril of the current situation, the appalling waste of the arms race. Each of us has a responsibility to think about this in global terms, with tolerance, trust, and candor, free from ideological dogmatism, parochial interests, or national egotism." By the 1960s, though, Sakharov would turn against the very weapons he created. He was solidly against nuclear proliferation, an idea Sakharov believed his government was wrongly for. This would lead to his persecution and eventual exile. Under Mikhail Gorbachev, Sakharov would be allowed to return to Moscow in 1986, where he would pass away 3 years later. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join me next time when we cover an entirely different topic. We go way back in time to the great expansion of Russia under Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great. So, until next time, до свидания и спасибо за внимание.